Fellow learners and seekers of wisdom, today we consider a quiet moment, a man, a gaze, and a recognition. His eyes knew her before words did. At first glance, it may appear a tale of sentiment or destiny in the poetic sense. But let us instead interpret this through the enduring lens of Stoic philosophy. In Stoic philosophy, the mind does not immediately form judgments upon receiving sensory input. Instead, it first receives an impression. This is known as phantasia, the mental image or impression that arises when we encounter the world through our senses. Whether it's the sound of a bird singing, the sight of a loved one, or even the feeling of the wind against our skin, the first experience is purely passive and uncolored by judgment. It's simply a perception, a raw and unprocessed input from the world around us. The key Stoic principle here is that impressions themselves are neutral. They are not inherently good or bad, beautiful or ugly, joyful or sorrowful. The Stoics often distinguished between this first, automatic perception and the judgment that follows. That judgment is what they referred to as synkatathesis or assent. Assent is the moment when we actively engage with an impression, either accepting it as true or rejecting it. It is when the mind, influenced by personal beliefs, experiences, and emotions, assigns meaning to an initial, neutral impression. This distinction between phantasia and synkatathesis is crucial. According to the Stoics, it is not the impressions themselves that disturb us, but our judgments of them. The impressions, in their essence, simply arise. They are a part of the natural process of experiencing the world. What causes emotional turmoil or distress is how we choose to respond to those impressions. For example, you might see a person and feel an impression of attraction or admiration. The sight alone, whether of their face, posture, or actions, has no inherent quality that can be categorized as good or bad. The moment you form a judgment, however, perhaps you say to yourself, "I am in love with this person," or "I am drawn to them," that is when the emotional reaction begins. It's this assent, this mental engagement, that shapes our experience. From the Stoic point of view, a great deal of human suffering arises from our impulsive judgments. The path to tranquility, then, is not to eliminate impressions, which is impossible, but to gain mastery over the judgments we make about them. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, encourages us to observe our thoughts carefully. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He implies that it's not the things we see or experience that control us, but the way we interpret them. In the context of the phrase, "his eyes knew her before words did," we can imagine that the man's eyes, upon seeing her, received an impression, a simple, neutral sensory input. At that point, he has yet to judge whether she is someone he desires or someone he wishes to avoid. The eyes do not immediately assign labels to the person before him. It's simply a perception. This moment of pure perception is free from the weight of judgment. It is a moment of clarity before the mind begins its habitual categorization. He might notice the way she holds herself, the light in her eyes, or even the rhythm of her movements. All these are mere impressions. However, once his mind begins to process and assign meaning to the encounter, the impression transforms. He might begin to interpret her posture as graceful, her presence as inviting, and thus make an emotional connection. This is the moment when synkatathesis happens, the moment of assent. It is in this moment that he chooses to interpret her as someone significant, someone to be admired or pursued, or perhaps someone to fear. His interpretation will shape his feelings, and those feelings will then guide his actions. The Stoics teach us to pause before we assent to these impressions. They ask us to reflect on the nature of the impressions we receive and question whether the judgments we are about to make are truly aligned with nature and reason. It's not that we can control the impressions or avoid them, but we can control our assent. We can choose to accept or reject the emotional reactions that follow. A Stoic, seeing someone for the first time, might acknowledge the impression, the sight of the person, the feelings it evokes, but would refrain from jumping to conclusions about them. Instead, the Stoic will observe, reflect, and remain grounded in reason, always aware that impressions are fleeting and that true wisdom comes from restraint, not immediate reaction. In this way, the Stoic provides us with a powerful tool, the ability to detach from automatic emotional responses and to engage with the world from a place of mindful awareness. This ability to govern our judgment is the foundation of Stoic tranquility and resilience. The Stoic concept of oikeiosis is deeply intertwined with the philosophy's understanding of nature and human nature. At its core, oikeiosis refers to the idea of natural affinity or belonging, a deep inherent connection to what is proper to us and in harmony with our nature. In Stoic thought, this principle underlies not only our relationships with others, but also our understanding of the world around us. It is the natural instinct that directs us toward what we are designed for and what aligns with our ultimate purpose. In the case of the phrase, "His eyes knew her before words did," we can interpret this through the lens of oikeiosis as an unconscious recognition of someone or something that resonates with our deeper nature. Oikeiosis suggests that humans are naturally inclined to recognize and seek out what is in alignment with their essential being. This is not merely a mental or rational decision, but something more primal, something felt at the core of one's being. When we encounter something or someone that resonates with our deepest nature, whether through instinct or intuition, it is as though we recognize a kindred spirit, a part of ourselves that exists in the world. The Stoics believed that humans are not isolated individuals floating through the world in isolation. Instead, they are part of a greater whole, embedded in a world governed by logos, the divine reason that unites everything in existence. This universal reason forms the blueprint of the cosmos and also directs us in our actions. As rational beings, we are a part of this divine order, and our responses to the world around us reflect this deeper connection to it. It's as if beneath our conscious minds, there is a natural, almost instinctual awareness of what is in harmony with our nature, what is good for us, and what is in line with the greater purpose of the universe. For the man in the example, when his eyes meet hers, this moment of recognition may not be purely intellectual or emotional. Instead, it is an intuitive response, a recognition that goes beyond words or reasoning. There is something about her, something in the way she exists in the world, that feels familiar, that feels right. His eyes are not simply responding to physical features or external qualities, but to a deeper resonance, a connection that transcends surface-level impressions. This may be why the phrase suggests that his eyes knew her before words did, because the connection they share is not based on mere labels or conscious recognition, but rather on a deeper, pre-verbal understanding rooted in the Stoic notion of oikeiosis. This natural affinity also helps to explain the profound sense of belonging and purpose that Stoics speak of when discussing relationships and human connections. The Stoics recognize that humans, like all living creatures, are part of the larger fabric of the universe, and thus our sense of what is proper, to us is not just a personal preference, but a reflection of our place within that fabric. When the man recognizes the woman through his eyes, it is not simply a random event. It is the result of a natural process where, in the vast and interconnected web of life, they have come into alignment in a moment that feels profound. The Stoics taught that this affinity is not something to be feared or rejected, but rather embraced. It is part of our nature, and by recognizing it, we come closer to understanding our place in the grand scheme of things. However, it is essential to recognize that while oikeiosis brings us closer to what is natural and proper, it does not mean that all instincts are infallible or should be followed without reflection. Just as the recognition of a person through our eyes may feel natural, the Stoic path urges us to examine the situation carefully, to assess whether this recognition aligns with virtue and the good. Thus, oikeiosis is both an acknowledgement of our natural tendencies and a call to reason. The man's initial recognition of the woman might be an instinctive pull, but the Stoic would encourage him to reflect on this connection with wisdom, ensuring that it is a recognition rooted in reason and aligned with the greater good. In this way, oikeiosis serves as a guide, reminding us that our true nature is one of connection, but it is through rational reflection that we fully understand and direct those connections toward their highest purpose. The Stoic understanding of oikeiosis challenges us to see our connections with the world and with others not as fleeting or superficial, but as part of a deeper, rational order. We are naturally drawn to what is aligned with our nature and the nature of the universe, but it is through wisdom that we navigate these connections, ensuring they contribute to our ultimate flourishing. In Stoic philosophy, logos refers to the divine reason or rational principle that pervades and organizes the universe. It is the rational structure underlying all of existence, governing everything from the stars in the sky to the deepest thoughts of human beings. Everything in the cosmos, according to Stoicism, is an expression of logos. This concept is not limited to abstract thought or intellectual reason, but is seen as the fundamental principle that organizes the entire natural world, shaping both the physical and the moral order. It is the force that connects all things, giving meaning and purpose to the seemingly chaotic and disordered world. When we consider the phrase, "His eyes knew her before words did," through the lens of logos, we are invited to understand that the recognition the man experiences is not based on some arbitrary or purely emotional event. Rather, it is a manifestation of logos, the universal reason at work in the world. His initial perception of her, his eyes recognizing something familiar or aligned with his nature, is not a random accident, but a part of the larger, rational order that governs all interactions, encounters, and relationships. From a Stoic perspective, logos is not merely a mental construct or abstract idea. It is an active, living force that permeates the universe and reveals itself through everything we encounter. In the case of the man and the woman, logos is the force that draws their paths together, facilitating a moment of recognition. Their meeting is not a coincidence or a fleeting accident, but is instead part of the unfolding of a greater rational order. The man's eyes know her because, in some sense, their encounter is an expression of the same universal reason that governs all existence. It is as though the very nature of the universe has orchestrated this moment, guiding him toward an awareness of her that transcends words, concepts, or the limitations of individual experience. In Stoic thought, this connection to logos extends beyond mere intellectual understanding. It is the way the rational principle governs every interaction in life. Our minds, being part of this rational order, are able to recognize these moments of alignment when we encounter them. The Stoic sees the world not as a collection of isolated events, but as a cohesive, rationally ordered system. This system is not random or chaotic, but intentional, purposeful, and governed by logos. Everything happens for a reason, and our perception of the world is the means by which we engage with this reason. When the man's eyes meet the woman's, this moment is more than a simple recognition based on appearance or attraction. It is a deeper, almost intuitive awareness of something in alignment with the rational order of the universe. Their connection is not merely a product of individual desire or subjective perception. It is a manifestation of the greater logos that shapes all relationships. Just as the stars follow their course in the heavens according to the laws of nature, so too do human interactions unfold according to the rational principles that guide the cosmos. This is a reminder to the Stoic that we are not isolated beings, disconnected from the universe or from one another. We are part of a rationally ordered world, and our interactions, relationships, and experiences are expressions of that order. In this sense, there is no such thing as a purely random encounter. Everything that happens, every meeting, every event, has its place within the larger framework of logos. The man's recognition of the woman is an expression of this interconnectedness, a reflection of the way logos operates in the world. He does not simply recognize her because of his own desires or subjective preferences, but because their meeting is in some way aligned with the universal reason that governs all things. From a practical Stoic perspective, understanding that logos governs all things can be both humbling and empowering. It reminds us that we are part of a greater whole, that our actions, thoughts, and relationships are interconnected with the rational order of the universe. It also challenges us to see the world in a different light, one where everything, even seemingly small and personal encounters, is part of a larger, purposeful design. The Stoic approach to life is not one of passive acceptance, but of active engagement with the rational principles that govern the world. To live in harmony with logos is to recognize the deeper connections that bind us to one another and to the universe itself. In the case of the man and the woman, their initial meeting is not merely a chance event, but a moment of recognition within the rational order of the universe. Their eyes meet, and in that instant, they both tap into something deeper than words, something guided by logos. It is through this understanding of logos that the Stoic finds meaning in all things, recognizing that even the smallest of encounters carries within it the wisdom and order of the universe itself. This awareness encourages the Stoic to approach life with a sense of purpose, knowing that every moment, every interaction is part of the unfolding of the rational, divine order of logos. The Stoics often emphasize the power of clarity and reason over the clutter of language and excessive judgment. While language is undoubtedly a vital tool for communication and understanding, it can also obscure truth and cloud our perception of the world. In Stoic thought, there is a deep appreciation for the ability to observe the world clearly before it is colored by words, concepts, and labels. This is precisely what we encounter when we consider the idea of recognition without language. In the context of Stoicism, this recognition is not merely a casual glance or surface-level observation, but a deeper, more intuitive awareness that precedes verbal expression. When we speak of recognition without language, we are referring to the ability to perceive something for what it truly is before our mind rushes to categorize or label it. In the case of the phrase, "His eyes knew her before words did," we are reminded of the purity of first impressions. Before the man forms any verbal judgments or attaches any labels to the woman before him, his eyes simply perceive her. This moment, free from words, is untainted by the biases and assumptions that often accompany the use of language. It is a pure act of perception, a direct engagement with reality. In Stoic philosophy, the ability to perceive clearly without the interference of language is a vital part of cultivating wisdom and tranquility. The Stoics were acutely aware that our minds tend to fill the gaps in our perception with interpretations, judgments, and labels. These mental constructions can distort reality, leading us to see the world not as it is, but as we wish it to be. When we encounter something or someone, we often immediately apply a label: beautiful, dangerous, strange, unfamiliar. These labels, while useful for communication, can be limiting and misleading, preventing us from seeing the true essence of the object or person in front of us. The Stoic ideal, then, is to look at the world with a sense of clarity and simplicity, free from the distortion of preconceived notions. This does not mean rejecting language or dismissing its value. Rather, it means recognizing that language, while useful, can often act as a veil over the truth. Before we speak, we must first see the world as it is, with open eyes and an unclouded mind. In the case of the man and the woman, his initial recognition of her through his eyes is an acknowledgement of her being without the interference of words. He does not immediately label her as beautiful or interesting or any other descriptor. He simply sees her, and in that seeing, there is a recognition of something deeper, something beyond what language can express at that moment. This recognition without language is deeply connected to the Stoic understanding of the world as a place of rational order, governed by logos. By seeing clearly before we speak, we align ourselves with the deeper rational structure of the universe. Words are a human invention, useful for communication, but they are not the ultimate reality. The true essence of things, of people, of events, of nature, exists beyond the words we use to describe them. In the first moment of recognition, the man's eyes perceive this essence, free from the limitations of verbal labels. This process of seeing without judgment is not to be confused with passivity or indifference. It is an active engagement with reality, a choice to observe and understand before reacting. The Stoic practice of mindfulness encourages us to observe our thoughts, emotions, and perceptions without immediately giving in to them. Similarly, when we encounter the world, we are encouraged to see things as they are, without the immediate urge to label or judge them. By doing so, we free ourselves from the chains of subjective interpretation and allow ourselves to engage with the world in a more authentic and true way. In practical terms, this ability to recognize without language is essential for the cultivation of virtue. When we are free from the distortions of language, we can make decisions that are based on reason rather than impulse. We are better able to perceive the world with equanimity, seeing things as they are rather than as we wish them to be. This clarity of perception allows us to act in accordance with virtue, responding to events with wisdom and moderation rather than being swept away by our immediate emotional reactions. Ultimately, recognition without language speaks to the Stoic principle of detachment. It is about recognizing the world and people as they are, without being overly attached to the labels or judgments we place upon them. It is about seeing through the veil of words and accessing a deeper, more authentic understanding. In the case of the man's gaze upon the woman, his recognition is a pure moment of clarity, one in which he sees her essence before the mind rushes to label or categorize her. This moment is not clouded by personal bias, desire, or expectation. It is simply an instance of pure awareness, an unspoken recognition that allows for a deeper connection to the world and to others. The Stoic wisdom in this moment lies in the ability to see clearly, to recognize what is, without the distractions of language and judgment, and to act in harmony with the rational order of the universe. In Stoic philosophy, emotions are not inherently negative or something to be eradicated. Instead, the Stoics view emotions as natural responses to external events or internal impressions. The key Stoic insight, however, is that emotions, while a natural part of the human experience, are often distorted by irrational judgments and excessive desires. The Stoics argue that by understanding the origin and nature of our emotions, we can learn to respond to them in a more balanced and controlled way. This ability to manage our emotions without suppressing or being overwhelmed by them is a central tenet of Stoic philosophy. The Stoic approach to emotions is rooted in the idea that we have control over how we respond to impressions. While we cannot always control the external events that trigger emotions, we do have control over our judgment and our reactions to those events. In other words, it is not the events themselves that cause us distress, but our interpretation of them. The Stoics teach that by training ourselves to pause before reacting, we can examine our initial emotional responses and decide whether to assent to them or not. This process is an essential part of Stoic practice, leading to greater emotional resilience and inner peace. In the context of the phrase, "His eyes knew her before words did," we are reminded of how emotions can arise almost instantaneously in response to an external stimulus. When the man sees the woman, an emotional response may arise, perhaps an instinctual feeling of attraction, curiosity, or even admiration. However, the Stoic would encourage him to pause and examine this emotion before allowing it to dictate his actions. The emotional reaction itself is not inherently problematic, but the Stoic goal is to cultivate the ability to respond to emotions with reason rather than be swept away by them. This is where the practice of epoch, the suspension of judgment, becomes essential. By withholding immediate judgment, the man can assess whether his emotional reaction is based on a rational understanding of the situation or whether it is a result of irrational desires or expectations. One of the key principles that the Stoics emphasize in managing emotions is distinguishing between what is within our control and what is not. External events, including other people's behavior, are beyond our control. However, our thoughts, judgments, and reactions to those events are within our control. This distinction is crucial when it comes to managing emotions. When the man first sees the woman, he has no control over the initial impression or the emotional stirrings it might evoke. However, he does have control over what he chooses to do with that emotion. Does he immediately act on it, allowing his feelings to govern his actions, or does he take a step back, reflect, and consider whether this emotion is in line with his Stoic principles? This approach encourages the Stoic to cultivate emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize and understand one's emotions, as well as the ability to regulate them. Rather than allowing emotions to control him, the Stoic seeks to be the master of his emotions, responding to them in a way that aligns with virtue. For instance, if the man feels a strong attraction to the woman, the Stoic would not repress or deny the feeling, but he would examine whether this attraction is based on superficial or fleeting desires, or whether it is grounded in deeper, virtuous qualities. Is this emotional response leading him to act in a way that is aligned with his principles? Or is it a distraction that pulls him away from his higher purpose? The Stoic emphasis on emotional control is not about suppressing or eliminating emotions, but rather about responding to them with wisdom and self-awareness. The Stoics understood that emotions are an inherent part of the human condition, and they do not seek to eliminate them altogether. Instead, they teach us to approach our emotions with a sense of detachment, allowing us to engage with them without becoming consumed by them. This detachment is not about indifference or coldness, but about recognizing that our emotions do not define us and that we have the ability to choose how to respond to them. In practical terms, this means that the Stoic would encourage the man to recognize his emotional reaction to the woman, but to avoid letting it govern his behavior. Instead, he would be encouraged to focus on the virtue of wisdom, considering whether his feelings align with reason and whether his actions will lead him toward greater flourishing. By practicing this kind of emotional regulation, the Stoic aims to achieve a state of tranquility, free from the turmoil caused by unchecked emotional reactions. Ultimately, the Stoic view of emotions is one of empowerment. By recognizing that we have control over our emotional responses, we are no longer passive victims of our feelings. Instead, we become active participants in our emotional lives, choosing how to respond with reason and virtue. The Stoics teach us that emotions, when understood and managed properly, can serve as valuable signals, guiding us toward greater self-awareness and understanding. The man's recognition of the woman, while accompanied by an emotional reaction, offers him the opportunity to exercise his rational faculty and choose how to engage with that emotion. This ability to choose, to exercise control over our emotional responses, is at the heart of Stoic philosophy and leads to a more resilient and harmonious life. Virtue occupies the central place in Stoic philosophy, regarded as the highest good and the ultimate goal of human life. For the Stoics, virtue is not just a set of moral guidelines or ethical principles, but the natural expression of a life lived in harmony with reason and the universal order. It is through the cultivation of virtue that one aligns oneself with the logos, or the rational structure of the cosmos. The Stoics believe that to live a virtuous life is to live in accordance with nature, to act from wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, and to embrace a character that reflects these values in all aspects of life. It is only through virtue that human beings can achieve true happiness and fulfillment, and it is this pursuit that grounds all Stoic teachings. When we examine the phrase, "His eyes knew her before words did," through the lens of virtue, we can understand it as an invitation to recognize not just the surface-level attributes of a person, but to perceive the deeper qualities that reflect their character. For the Stoic, the first response to any individual, whether it be in love, friendship, or interaction, should not be based solely on external appearances or fleeting emotions. Rather, true recognition comes from seeing the virtues that lie beneath the surface, the qualities that align with the universal rational order, and which embody wisdom and integrity. In a moment of connection, the Stoic would encourage an individual to see beyond mere words, labels, or judgments, and to instead perceive the deeper qualities of character. The man's initial recognition of the woman through his eyes is not simply an acknowledgement of her physical beauty or social status, but ideally a recognition of her virtues. Is she wise, just, temperate, courageous? Does she embody the qualities that the Stoics believe lead to a flourishing life? To truly know someone, according to Stoic thought, is to see their character and to assess whether their actions and behaviors align with the virtues that are essential for living a good and meaningful life. The Stoics make a distinction between what is external and what is internal. The external, such as wealth, beauty, and social standing, is not within our control and is thus considered indifference in Stoic terms. What matters most, according to the Stoics, is the internal, what we cultivate within ourselves and what we recognize in others in terms of virtue. In this sense, The Stoic would encourage the man to recognize the woman in terms of her internal qualities rather than her external traits. For instance, if he observes in her qualities of wisdom and virtue, he will be able to connect with her not based on superficial attraction, but through the shared understanding of a common moral framework. Their connection, then, becomes a meeting of character, grounded in mutual respect and shared values. The Stoic concept of virtue also extends to the idea of how we engage with others and how we judge the worth of any individual. Rather than allowing emotions to cloud judgment, the Stoic encourages individuals to consider the virtues of those they meet and interact with as a way of forming relationships based on reason rather than impulse. In the case of the man's first recognition of the woman, he may be initially swept up in the emotions of the moment. However, through the Stoic lens, the man is encouraged to reflect on whether his initial feelings of attraction or interest are aligned with the greater virtues of wisdom, temperance, and justice. Are his feelings guided by the pursuit of virtue, or are they based on base desires that distract from the true goal of flourishing? Furthermore, virtue in Stoic philosophy is not about following rules or conforming to societal expectations. It is about an internal alignment with reason and the rational structure of the universe. It is through understanding and practicing virtue that we become better versions of ourselves, able to engage with the world in a meaningful way. In relationships, this means that when we truly recognize another person, we acknowledge their virtue, not simply their external qualities, but their internal character, driven alignment with reason. In the context of the phrase, the act of recognition is thus an act of discernment. It is about choosing to engage with the deeper, virtuous aspects of a person, to see them for who they truly are rather than for what they appear to be. The Stoic approach asks us to reflect on our own character and to ensure that our perceptions and judgments are aligned with virtue, not driven by superficial emotions or desires. This approach leads to more authentic relationships, rooted in shared values rather than fleeting attraction or external circumstances. Ultimately, the Stoic vision of virtue calls for a recognition that transcends superficial judgment, urging us to see the essence of others based on their moral character rather than their physical appearance or social status. Through the cultivation of virtue in ourselves and the recognition of it in others, we engage with the world in a way that is meaningful, grounded in reason, and aligned with the greater rational order of the cosmos. Thus, the man's recognition of the woman is not merely an emotional or physical acknowledgement, but a deeper, more thoughtful recognition of her virtues and her alignment with the higher principles of Stoic philosophy. Through this kind of recognition, we can build relationships that are based on authenticity, mutual respect, and the pursuit of the good life. In conclusion, the phrase, "his eyes knew her before words did," invites us to reflect on the deep and profound nature of human connection, particularly through the lens of Stoic philosophy. At its core, this moment of recognition transcends superficial judgments and instant emotional reactions, emphasizing a deeper understanding of the world and others. The Stoics, in their teachings, remind us that true wisdom and virtue lie in the ability to perceive clearly, to respond to our emotions with reason, and to see others not through the distorted lens of personal desire or fleeting attraction, but through the lens of virtue and character. Through the 6 key points we've explored, from the role of reason and logic * logos * in guiding our perceptions, to the recognition that emotions can be controlled and managed, to the ultimate importance of seeing and valuing virtue in others, we understand that the Stoic approach to human relationships is one grounded in mindfulness, clarity, and a commitment to what is good and true. Recognition, in the Stoic sense, is not just a simple acknowledgement of another's presence, but a deeper, more thoughtful engagement with their true nature, transcending the temporary and transient. By embracing these Stoic principles, we can move beyond superficial impressions and create relationships rooted in mutual respect, shared virtues, and the pursuit of wisdom. In doing so, we align ourselves with the greater rational order of the universe, living lives that are not only more peaceful and content, but also more meaningful and connected to the world around us. This form of recognition, one that begins with the eyes and transcends words, reminds us that there is always more beneath the surface, and that true understanding and connection lie in seeing the world and others through the eyes of virtue.